I wanted to make absolutely sure that there wasn't any suffering. But the hand, I think it's like the left hand of God thing. I'd always considered my mother very formidable, very fierce, very forbidding. She had always been a very big influence on my life, and whether I hated her or loved her, it was very dynamic. And the night she died, it was amazing to me how much like every other victim of mine she had died, how vulnerable and how human she was. I'm Laura. I'm here with my best friend Marina, and this is Grim.
This man needs to shut the fuck up.
Yeah, he talks a lot, and I could probably make a million parts if I did all of his quotes, but they're not actually that impressive. They don't say that much.
No, he just speaks words.
Yeah, and it comes back to, I think in part 2, we were saying how he has this crazy high IQ, but he hasn't realized his potential. He like stunted at whatever age. He's talks and acts like a little boy.
Mm-hmm. And for anyone who's just joining us, this is Edmund Kemper, part 3.
Shit. Yeah,
so I would probably go back and listen to the first 2 parts.
You know, I did say that when I was going to give the trigger warning. I was like, well, you heard all the trigger warnings in part 2. And if you didn't hear that, I don't know what you're doing here because this is part 3. But yes, this is about Ed Kemper. I think I did that on part 1 where I completely forgot to talk about who the recording was from. Mm-hmm. So yeah, Ed Kemper.
Ed Kemper.
Ed Kemper. Okay, so we have a few housekeeping items before we get into the final part. I won't leave you on a cliffhanger. This is it. I was kidding about the further multiple parts. We can start with our Patreon shout-outs.
Whoop, whoop.
Woohoo! All right, first up, we have Meegs.
Meegs! Yeah, we love you, Meegs!
I wrote this, and I couldn't wait to give this shout-out because I was like, that was going to be so fun to say.
Meegs! Whoop, whoop. Oh,
okay.
We're harmony.
We should have harmonized.
Meegs! I'll go low.
That was good.
Meegs.
That was like when you hit keys on a piano.
Meegs.
And next up, we have Cam.
Cam! We love you, Cam!
We love you, Cam! Woo! Beth W.
Beth W. We love you, Beth.
We
Thank
love
you so much.
Shannon E.
Shannon E. We love you. Woo! Thank you so much.
Loretta M.
Loretta M.
We love you.
Reminds me of Loretta Lynn, and I love her.
Oh. Okay, I don't know who that is.
It's a country singer.
Too. Oh, okay.
You're looking at country.
Well, 2 minutes.
Loretta, and we love you.
Did you hear my voice just give up?
I thought that was like a water noise. It was like bloop.
Nope, I was attempting to say 2 minutes and 53 seconds.
Did you have a puberty burp?
Sorry. Okay, next up. Kristen H, and that's my girl, Kristen. I know who that is.
Kristen H.
Kristen H. Kristen, I love you. I just talked to you on a meeting today. I love you. All right. Next up, we have Kate.
Kate,
we love you, Kate. Woohoo! No meetings for us today,
Thank you so much, Kate.
Gabby N.
Gabby N, we love you.
We love you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. And Faith. Woo! Thank you,
love
Faith.
you. Woo woo.
Marina's face when she gets into the high ranges.
Oh,
we're so sorry for that. Okay. Woo. We get real worked up on our Patreon shout-outs.
We do.
Broke a sweat there.
I like to sing as many names as I can.
Yeah, just sing, period.
Yes, under 3 minutes. We made it. And the other housekeeping item is we've had a few people ask us for this. You know, some people aren't into like the Patreon subscription or whatever.
Fair. Everything's subscription now, so we're sorry about that.
That's right, yeah. So if you guys just, I don't know, want to like buy us a glass of wine or like buy us a coffee, we're on Buy Me a Coffee now. It's buymeacoffee.com/grimcrimepodcast. And that's just like a one-time thing. And you don't have to do it if you don't want to.
Yeah.
But like if you want to buy Laura a Celsius, you just go on there and you buy her a Celsias.
Fair warning, I did have one today.
She did.
Hence the shout out excitement.
She got here pretty manic.
Yeah.
So.
Yep. Well, it's past my bedtime, so.
That happens too.
You got to do it. You got to do what you got to do.
So anyways, check it out. But we love you guys so much. We love all of our Patreons.
We love you for free, as we say.
We love everyone for free, but we do love all of your support. And it makes it a little less painful to work a second full-time job on top of our full-time jobs from this podcast.
It's a lot. Mm-hmm.
It is a lot, but we love you. And
we do love you. And we love it.
It's really great.
It's fun.
Yeah.
Yay.
It is fun.
Whoop, whoop. Okay. Okay. All right. We're going to bring it down a couple notches here. Okay.
What case were you talking where you were like, and I was
like, my voice just kept getting higher. I don't know, but I'm going to go low now. Okay. before we start.
When
My
they go
radio,
low, we go high.
My radio DJ voice. Okay. You got a face for radio. All right. So I already talked about the trigger warning, but just in case you missed it, amongst you were fast forwarding through all the shouting, there is a massive trigger warning. And again, if you don't know what that is, go back to maybe part 1 or part 2, and you'll get all the deets. This, relatively speaking, this one's not quite as bad, but it's still it's pretty bad.
Maybe skip our podcast.
Yeah, maybe. Yeah, maybe. Okay, so in part 2, we left off with Ed's engagement to the anonymous 17-year-old after the murders of Alice Liu and Rosalind Thorpe. Now, we have covered many a case where the killer gains expertise and confidence as time progresses, leading them to escalate in the frequency or manner of their kills. Such was the case with Ed, though at the same time he was ramping up, he was unraveling.
Oh boy.
Which actually we really also see. I mentioned last time that he was spending more and more time at the jury room, that bar where law enforcement gathered to wind down after their shifts. Despite the need to keep his mouth shut to avoid suspicion that Big Ed was the co-ed killer, he consumed endless beers punctuated by tequila shots, fearless about what his loose lips might say or what ships they might sink.
I was thinking.
I know, I can't say that phrase. Yeah. Ironically, Ed was more afraid of his mother than the police, which reminds me of my younger days, which was definitely more afraid of my dad than the police.
He killed his grandparents already, right?
He did. Oh, yeah, they're long
The
gone.
grandparents, yeah. All
Yeah,
right. I just wanted to, like, in my head, I was like, mom's dead already, but nope, that was the grandparents.
Yeah, and dad pieced out many years ago. Now, in addition to what Ed had downed at the bar, he was consuming 7 to 8 gallons of wine a week, or, what we do on Monday or Tuesday nights.
Sounds average, yeah.
No, I was thinking about it. I was like, is that a lot? I'm like, yeah, yes, Laura, that is a lot. Because that's more than a gallon a day.
And that's, what are, the regular bottles are like 24 ounces. And a gallon.
Oh, like a soda bottle is like 24 ounces.
No, like a standard.
That's 750 milliliters, and I am not
Which
quite
is
sure.
about 25 ounces.
Nuh-uh.
Yes, it is.
No way.
It is.
All right, we're gonna have to Google. Okay, what does the Goog say?
It is 25.36 float ounces. I have tracked a full bottle of wine on MyFitnessPal enough to know exactly how many ounces it is.
Okay, but then
So that's 5 bottles of wine a day.
Okay, thank you.
That's
for
a lot.
It is that the gallon alone was making. Okay. Anyway, yes, that's a lot. So he was drinking a lot at home, at the bar. That's a lot. And yeah, that's in addition to all the things he was drinking at the bar.
Oh, the beer and tequila? Mm-hmm. Oh my, that's so much alcohol.
The fact that he didn't get arrested first for just like being intoxicated in public, now also remember this man was 6'9" and 280 pounds. So he could probably consume significantly more than you or I could.
Okay, but 5 bottles.
Okay, not
5 bottles of wine seems
okay. That's a lot when you put it that way.
I know,
That's
it's a lot. Okay.
But his drinking was exacerbated by fights with his mother, of course, which exploded from the smallest thing, even over when Ed should have his teeth cleaned. So literally everything.
Oh, and he's living with her in the apartment, right? Sorry, I'm like,
no,
it's
right.
really only been 2 weeks, and my brain is like, you remember nothing. But
that's okay
yes.
because we don't know when our I almost said viewers again, when our listeners last listened.
Don't worry, guys. I'll catch you up with me. I'll drag you along.
His biggest concern was that she would find his cache of keepsakes from his victims. Knowing he couldn't keep their rotting, bodiless heads for as long as he wanted to, Ed instead kept possessions of the deceased, like necklaces and rings. Ed's opinion that his mother was scarier than the police changed when he had an unexpected visit from an officer. He had just arrived back home to his mother's to find a cruiser parked in the driveway. Ed rolled down the window to ask what he wanted. The officer asked if Ed had a .44 Magnum revolver and gave him the serial number. Ed politely responded that he did, and the officer told him that they had discovered that Ed had lied on his application for the gun. Evidently, he'd said he had never been in a prison or mental institution or convicted of a crime, but of course we know he had.
Yes.
And now I thought, oh, well, he had his juvenile records sealed, so shouldn't that have been okay? But I wonder if you still had to acknowledge it. So it was sealed in that it wasn't going to prevent you from getting anything, but maybe you had to acknowledge, or maybe it was the mental institution that he had to acknowledge. Surprisingly, these were some of the few details that I couldn't find.
I was just going to say, I mean, even like in Connecticut, if you get certain crimes dropped or they seal them, they will still show up on if you applied to work for the FBI, like the background check that they run will still show up those things, even if they're not on like a common background check. So maybe it was something like that. But what are they just like randomly running gun applications? Didn't he have that for like years at that point?
And I'm shocked. And then I'm also shocked because this is the 70s and I just assumed that they didn't check anything in the 70s. So
it probably took 4 years for the facts to come in.
You're joking,
to the police department.
It's very possible.
And they were like, hot off the press, this guy lied.
4 years ago. Yeah. And I mean, honestly, it was just bad luck, I think, for Ed at that point. So anyway, Ed quickly answered, "It's upstairs." The officer started towards the apartment stairs, and as Ed thought more about the weapon's location, it was upstairs, all right.
Next to a head.
Literally, I just wrote upstairs in the closet next to the necklaces and the rings of the dead girls whose severed torsos he'd violated. So Ed gave him some rushed but effective excuse and retrieved the gun alone. I can't believe I don't know what he said, but I can't believe it worked, because can you imagine looking for someone and like knowing that they had committed some kind of crime and or had been in some institution for whatever, and then being like, no, yeah, you go ahead and get your gun by yourself. And then just you come out here and meet me. So I don't know, but Ed was known to be super polite. He'd slipped through the fingers of officers before. So
yeah, I mean, and also the officer didn't have like a search warrant. No, so
that's true. Yeah,
if Ed's like, I don't want you in my bedroom.
Yeah, that's true.
But I agree with you. The officer's like, why don't you come out slow?
Yeah, really. I mean, he might have said that. Either way, Ed turned it over to the officer, who gave him some paperwork recording what had happened and went on his way.
What had happened was.
I know, I didn't even think of that. Yep. So Ed breathed a sigh of relief. What if the officer had come in? What if one of the neighbors had seen something and decided to talk to him? This would not do. This would not do at all. Ed continued to spend his nights at the jury room, drinking and talking and listening. From what he could tell, the police had no idea who was responsible for all those gruesome murders, and they certainly didn't suspect Big Ed. But Ed was concerned. Too many close calls, too many what ifs, too many careless moves on his part. It was now the weekend before Easter, over 2 months since his last kill. Feeling somehow brazen and paranoid, Ed went out driving. He cruised near the Berkeley campus, eyes peeled for just the right passenger. As he drove up Ashby Avenue, he spotted them. A blonde and a brunette, 2 young girls who attended Mills College in Oakland and wanted to make their way back for the night. He smiled as they climbed in. It reminded him of his first double murder. His first double murder as an adult. Oh. These 2 reminded him of Marianne and Anita. He began to get excited. He headed towards Oakland, thinking about where the best place would be to deviate to a more isolated location.
Wait, was Marianne and Anita, was that the one where he shot her in the front seat and the one in the back, they were...
No, it was the very first one, again, of the co-ed murders, where he pulled off and put Anita in the trunk while he murdered Marianne, and it was
and he tried to strangle her, and it was like a mess. Okay,
and he was like, oh, people leak slowly.
Yes, okay,
that one.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
All right.
Yep. So he's headed towards Oakland, which is where they wanted to go, and he was thinking about where's the best place I can turn off and go to somewhere more isolated. But before he did, the girls asked where he was going. Was this the right way? Ed was stunned. He's like, yes, it is the right way. I'm literally taking you to where you're going. So he had no idea what they were talking about, and they were just confused. They thought he was going, they were like already ahead. They thought that he was taking them somewhere else to murder them.
Okay.
And so instead of just leaning into that, because they were begging him to take him to his dorm, not to hurt them, and instead of playing into that, he desperately tried to convince them that he was going the right way and that they weren't in any danger. And it was like he was more concerned with being right than his ability to murder. So he ended up bringing them. It was only like a 10-minute drive. Ended up bringing them back to their dorm and let them out. And didn't murder them.
Oh my gosh.
Yep.
He's like, listen, bitches, before I murder you, you need to admit that we're headed in the right direction.
Literally. And so they must have gone back to their friends telling them about this harrowing tale, but not knowing like how literally like that them being so scared and wrong actually saved their lives.
Wow.
Crazy. Now, so this must have been frustrating for him because he was like, I think it just threw him off his game. He's never said why he didn't murder them. I think it's just he had a plan in his head and that's not how it went. Mm-hmm. So the following Friday, this is now Good Friday in 1973, Ed returned back home to his mother's. He had run some errands that day, ending with picking up an Easter lily for Mommy Dearest.
Oh.
It seemed he was always trying to earn her love and approval, but when he walked in, he was greeted with an empty house. Yet another abandonment for Big Ed. He called his mother at work to let her know he was home. She said, "Great, I'm not, and I won't be for a while. I have an event after work, and then I'm going to dinner, and I won't be home until late." So just like, I don't know, I imagine her flicking him off like a bug or something. Ed hung up, dejected. He went out and bought some beer and drank the entire six-pack, which really was just like the, aperitif for him, I think.
And a six-pack, that's acceptable.
That's what I'm saying, right?
Especially for a man that size, like, that's whatever.
True. But. Yeah. So he waited, and he thought, and he waited, and he thought. And at midnight, he was tired, and he went to bed. He woke up at 2 a.m. and checked her room to see if she had come home while he was sleeping, but she hadn't. He fell asleep again, waking up a couple hours later. Now it's 4 a.m. and Clarnell, remember her name? Mm-hmm. Clarnell was home now. She was in bed reading, which
at 4 a.m.
is what you do after coming in from a party at 4 a.m.
Of course.
Yeah. So Ed popped his head in. She asked, "What are you doing up?" He said, "Oh, nothing. Just wanted to make sure you were home." She responded, "I suppose you want to talk?" He was offended by this, her dismissive attitude. He said no. She told him they'd talk in the morning, and he said goodnight. But he wasn't going to sleep. In his waiting and thinking before she got home, he'd made up his mind. He was finally going to murder his mother.
He's doing too much thinking.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Ed went back in his room and sat idly, doing some more thinking, playing it out all in his head. Finally, at 5 a.m., he rose, walked into the kitchen, got a hammer and then a knife, and walked back into his mother's bedroom. Without hesitation, he bashed her skull in with the hammer.
That's so violent.
Mm-hmm. This is just you wait.
Oh, boy.
This is so trigger warning yet again, because, but I'll get into it, but just buckle up.
Proceed.
Okay. The primary job done, he began hacking off her head. No surprises there. In his words, "What's good for my victims is good for my mother."
Oh, wow.
But that is where the similarities ended. Ed had so much pent-up anger, and now he had a place to pour that anger into. Once it was detached from her body, he brought her head into the living room, put it on a shelf, and screamed at it for an hour.
Oh,
which I shouldn't laugh because he literally murdered someone, but it's kind of funny.
He's so fucked up.
Yep. So once he got that out of his system, or maybe his throat hurt, I don't know, he got a set of darts and threw them at her face.
Holy fuck.
Mm-hmm. And finally, he violently smashed the rest of her skull.
Wow.
Ed had expressed his own feelings, but he wanted to make sure that his mother would never be able to do so again. Apparently, death wasn't final enough for him. He subsequently cut out her tongue and vocal cords and put them in the garbage disposal.
Oh my God. Mm-hmm. This man is fucked. I mean, we already knew that. But
we did. It's just like...
This is above and beyond.
It's like what somebody really messed up would think about doing to somebody but never actually do.
Right.
And he actually did it. He'd be like, "Oh, I want to rip her tongue out." But like he actually did that.
But now, if I saw that in a movie, I'd be like, this is so violent and unnecessary.
Exactly. But he quite literally they'd be like, nobody throws darts at somebody's head.
This guy does.
He did.
Yeah.
Now, I know you have a garbage disposal, and I also do. Mm-hmm. You know how you have to be careful about what you put in there? Mm-hmm. A tongue and a larynx were a little much for it to take, and the flesh actually shot back out at Ed, and he later said that this felt very appropriate.
I'm gagging.
I've tried very hard not to think too closely about the details.
I can't say anything's ever shot back out of my garbage disposal, but I hope if that ever happens that it's not someone's larynx.
You're making me think too... Okay. All right. Anyway, finished with her head, Ed returned to his mother's bedroom to deal with her body. In an act that Freud would have had a field day with, Ed proceeded to have sex with the headless corpse. Of course, psychiatrist Ed had an explanation for this. "I came out of my mother's vagina, and in a rage, I went back in. I still loved my mother. It's hard for somebody to understand that you murder your mother through love. It isn't a rational process. You don't fucking say. It's a very painful process."
I'm just going to let that one lie.
And as if that wasn't enough, he also ended up having sex with her mutilated head.
Oh no, Ed.
Yeah. Now, having sufficiently violated his dead mother, Ed now had to deal with her body. He elected to stuff the remaining pieces of her body into the closet like he'd done many years before with the family cat. As he slid the door shut, he had an idea. He immediately called his mother's longtime friend, Sarah Sally Hallett. She didn't answer. Frustrated, Ed tried several more times, but to no avail. To kill some time, he drove down to the jury room, of course, for a few afternoon beers. There, he happened to run into an old friend who owed him $10. Jazzed up from his haphazard murder and necrophilia, Ed told himself he was going to kill this friend the first chance he got. But moments later, he was caught by surprise when the friend handed him what he was owed and apologized for taking so long to pay him back.
Oh.
Ed was so touched that he used the money to buy them both another drink and forgot about that whole senseless murder thing.
That's good.
Yeah. So that friend probably, in retrospect, realizes how lucky he was. But
some people really survive by the skin of their teeth in this story.
For real. Yeah. Now, Ed returned home around 5 and finally reached Sally on the phone. He said he wanted to take her and his mother out for an Easter dinner. Would she come over? She readily agreed and arrived to the Kemper household at 7:30. Ed told her that his mother was delayed and invited her in. Sally walked towards the couch and said, "Let's sit down, I'm dead."
Oh my God.
Yep. And now those were literally her last words.
No.
She was referring to the little sleep she'd gotten the night before because she'd been at the same party as Clarnell. But the irony freaked Ed out, kind of like when the girls got confused and thought he was going the wrong direction.
Yep.
Unfortunately, this did not save Sally's life. Mm-hmm. He decided to act quickly. Before she could even reach the couch, he pounced. He punched her in the stomach to stun her, and then, in his words, "I came up behind her and crooked my arm around her neck. I squeezed and just lifted her off the floor. She just hung there, and for a moment, I didn't realize she was dead. I had broken her neck, and her head was just wobbling around with the bones of her neck disconnected in the skin sac of her neck."
Oh, okay. So I don't like skin sac of your neck.
I'm going to say something really disgusting. Do you know what it made me think of? A turkey.
Oh, no.
Like, you know, you take the turkey neck out. Bleh, I don't know. It just all, for some reason, it just gave me, because I hate doing that part. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Oh, I don't like skin sac.
No.
How good would it feel, though, to just like separate your vertebrae, spin them around, and then put them back in? I think that would feel really good.
Now I really need to crack my back. Okay. Still paranoid after the episode with Aiko Ku, when she was actually alive, when Ed thought she was dead. Mm-hmm. If you remember that before.
Yes.
Ed lowered Sally to the floor and pulled a giant plastic bag over her head, cinching it closed with a rope. To be extra, extra sure, he, of course, cut off her head.
That'll do it.
Yeah, he was pretty confident at that point. So to celebrate, he went back to the jury room, of course.
Wow.
He cheersed with unknowing cops, maybe the very same ones who would later have to deal with the discovery of the two women's mutilated bodies. A while later, feeling much more relaxed and actually exhausted, he'd hardly slept the night before, and killing two people took quite a lot out of you. He headed back home to get some rest. However, when he arrived home, Sally's body caught his attention. He mustered up some energy and had sex with her cold, stiff body.
Ew, it's so gross.
It is. I'm like so detached, no pun intended, from what I'm reading.
Oh, I know.
But if I stop for a second and think about it, it actually turns my stomach.
You're just delivering the information without actually.
I'm just assaulting everyone else's ear holes. Mm-hmm. Ed would have happily assaulted everyone's ear holes too.
That's very true.
Now, he was truly spent, and he crawled into bed to get some shut-eye. Now, the bed, of course, was his mother's blood-soaked one where he had violently murdered her less than 24 hours ago.
Right. But, I mean, that's not going to stop him from sleeping.
He slept soundly. Yeah. Now, when Ed awoke, refreshed and sober, reality sunk in. Even if he chopped up the women's bodies and scattered the pieces, he'd murdered them carelessly in the house where he lived, or apartment where he lived. He'd left his DNA all over and in their bodies. Tomorrow was Easter Sunday, and his mother's absence would raise flags. There would be no denying it. It was time to leave. Not wanting to take his own easily identifiable...
I'm sorry, what's that word?
My brain wants to combine identifiable and vehicle.
Okay, I was like, there's no C in the word identifiable.
I just want to put them identifiable.
Identifical.
Yeah, that's what my brain wants to say. Let me just try that again in case you're trying to actually follow this story and understand what I'm saying. Not wanting to take his own easily identifiable vehicle.
Yay!
Ed grabbed Sally's keys and went to her car. I mean, she wasn't going to need it anytime soon. He loaded the vehicle with some weapons and other necessities and then went back inside to wrap up. He grabbed a pen and some paper and jotted a quick note. Not sloppy and incomplete, gents, just lack of time. Got things to do, 3 exclamation points. Approximately 5:15 a.m. Saturday. No need for her to suffer anymore at the hands of this horrible butcher. It was quick, asleep, no pain, the way I wanted it. And with that, he was off.
That's an interesting note.
Yep. He really didn't have a plan or destination. Aside from his time in Montana when he was young, he'd hardly ever been out of the county, let alone the state. He gassed up and headed east. After several, and this is in California, in case I realize.
Yes.
Not everyone has been living with Ed Kemper for the past 6 weeks.
Right.
After several hours of thinking, he realized that taking Sally's car had been just as stupid as taking his own. Of course, the police would look for it as soon as they found the slayed women. He stopped in Reno, Nevada, and rented a green Impala. He brought Sally's car to a nearby gas station, telling the mechanic there that he'd been having intermittent electrical problems, which is like the hardest thing ever to figure out. Figured it would buy him some time. On his way again, Ed proceeded to drive for 18 hours straight, covering... Well, I mean, he did make a couple of stops.
Okay.
He covered another 1,000 miles, stopping briefly for fuel, both for the car and for himself. The Impala got 87 regular for Ed, cigarettes and caffeine pills. The mixture did nothing to slow his unraveling. Not surprising at all. I mean, caffeine is known to calm you down, right? He mindlessly crossed the Rockies into Utah and finally Colorado, where his jaunt came to an abrupt stop when he was pulled over for speeding.
Okay.
How stupid. Wasn't that the kind of thing he swore he'd never do? Something those idiots at Atascadero had been caught for.
That's what I was thinking.
But just like when he'd been pulled over for the broken taillight after slaughtering Marianne and Anita, he was polite and respectful. The cop wasn't suspicious and let him on his way.
Of course, though. Like, this is, of course.
Yeah, right. Yeah. He didn't, at this point, he's not covered in blood. He doesn't have a dead body in his backseat.
Right.
You know, it's why he was speeding. He can go.
Right.
He wasn't even fined.
It's just crazy.
So Ed continued on, though the scare seemed to have taken the wind out of his sails, or maybe the caffeine pills could only do so much. He needs a Celsius. He can talk as fast as I am. He finally stopped in Pueblo, Colorado. It's a good thing I don't have to read for this podcast or anything. A little over 100 miles south of Denver. Exhausted, he wasn't sure what to do. He knew his time in the open was limited. As soon as his mother and Sally were discovered, his face would be plastered all over the national news. If she'd still been alive, maybe he could have called Clarnell like he had all those years before after he'd killed his grandparents. But Mommy couldn't help him now.
No.
You know, remember, he made sure she couldn't talk anymore.
Correct.
Out of options, Ed went to the nearest payphone, opened the phone book. Remember those. Also remember phone booths. He found the number for the Santa Cruz Sheriff's Office, back from where he was from, dug out some coins, and dialed. As soon as the call connected, Ed unloaded. He told the answering officer that he, Edmund Kemper III, was the co-ed killer.
Why?
He wanted it to be done. He was ready to be turned in.
Okay.
He could tell them every excruciating detail of the abductions, the murders, how he'd violated them after they were dead, how he'd chopped up their bodies and thrown the pieces away, and he could tell them where all those pieces were. Oh, and he'd just killed his mother and her friend, and they were still cooling off in his mother's closet.
The cop that answered the call must have been like, what in the actual fuck?
No, he literally was, because it's 4 a.m., and now Ed is probably talking much like I am.
Right.
Very caffeine-induced and not making a lot of sense. And they had no way, of course, to confirm his identity, and he just thought it was absurd. He thought it was a prank.
So I think that's fair.
He told Ed to call back later because he assumed if it was a prankster, he would pass out and forget about the joke.
Right.
But Ed wouldn't be deterred that easily. He recognized the officer's voice as Andy, whom he'd often drank with at the jury room.
Oh.
So he introduced himself again, like reiterating who he was.
He's like, I'm big Ed.
Literally, he did say that, and asked Andy to call Lieutenant Charles Scherer, who was overseeing the co-ed killer case. Andy took Ed only slightly more seriously, but not seriously enough to go wake up his lieutenant at 4 a.m. for what was probably still a joke. So Andy again told Ed to call back later when Lieutenant Scherer would be in, maybe 9 o'clock. Amazingly, Ed did as he was told. He went back to his car, maybe he napped a bit, and then returned to the phone booth several hours later. He reached a different officer who was even more dubious, maybe because Ed was borderline incoherent as a result of his lack of sleep and general unraveling. The officer hung up on him. Ed was nothing if not persistent, twice turned away. Ed called back a third time. He was just desperate for it all to end. It's almost like his mother's murder was his intent all along, and now that he'd accomplished that, he just wanted it to be done. He made it through, and the long-distance call ended up having a bad connection. It was still connected, so he stayed on the phone, but he was having trouble getting his point across.
He's like, can you hear me now? Can you hear me now?
That was exactly what I was thinking.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
I'm a murderer. Can you hear me now?
They managed to hear, literally, so like you said, they managed to hear co-ed killer and then some additional details he was telling them about the murders. And with these and the fact that he wasn't also claiming responsibility for several other unrelated murders, because this was, again, my favorite time period, the 70s. So there were murders happening. This was like the time of Charles Manson, and that was all happening in California.
But can you imagine that call? They're like, co-ed, torsos, rotten bodies, murder and blood, and they're like, wait, what?
Literally. I think it was probably pretty close to that. So obviously they're thinking like, what are you talking about? Like, is this serious? You know? So anyway, with all this extra detail and whatever information he could get through, they began taking him seriously. The answering officer had his superiors get on the phone, and soon they were all ears. But as soon as they started getting into it, the line went dead. Possibly because of a result of that bad connection. The officers now nervously waited. Would he call back? Ed put in his last nickel and for the fourth and final time dialed the number for Santa Cruz.
If I had a nickel.
Yeah, right. You would call Santa Cruz and confess to murder. Now able to speak more clearly thanks to a better connection, Ed told them more about himself, getting them to realize it was Big Ed from the jury room. But this actually made him more unbelievable. They could not fathom that the gentle giant could have been responsible for such violence. But he pushed, begging them to at least go to his mother's place to see he was telling the truth. This seemed like a worthwhile validation to the officers. Mm-hmm. And so funny enough, the man who had been assigned the task, or who was assigned the task, had been the same policeman who had gone to Ed's to confiscate the gun.
Oh my gosh.
This was Detective Mickey Aluffy. He arrived at 609A Ord Street, opening the unlocked door. He was immediately hit with the unmistakable scent of decomposing flesh.
No.
Taking a few tentative steps into the apartment, he saw blood and hair covering the carpet.
He's like, Big Ed's telling the truth.
Yeah, he called for backup. While he waited, he slowly explored the rest of the small home, finding the bed soaked with blood and other bodily fluids and the hammer and knife nearby.
Yeah.
As more officers quickly arrived, it was becoming quite the commotion at the apartment. Neighbors were coming out to see what was going on, and excited policemen guarding the scene were happy to tell them that their tall neighbor Ed had slain his mother, her friend, and all those college co-eds.
Oh my gosh.
Some were surprised, others always felt he'd been kind of creepy. All of them noted that Ed was always bringing things back and forth, in and out of the apartment, in and out of the car.
Oh, they're like those body-shaped garbage bags.
Literally, remember, he brought the head and the camera bag. Like, he was always literally bringing body parts back and forth. I mean, they didn't know that. But
right.
One of the neighbors even said that anytime they'd talk about the murders, Ed would comment the same thing he'd said at the jury room and at the gun shop. It must be some crazy person doing this. Mm-hmm. Meanwhile, still on the phone, since Ed had no idea where he was, they had him go to the nearest intersection and tell them the cross streets. Validating his location with a phone trace, the Santa Cruz Sheriff's Department got in touch with officers in Pueblo, giving them Ed's location and warning them that he was likely armed and dangerous. Pueblo police arrived and cautiously approached the phone booth. Ed told the Santa Cruz officers on the phone that they were there, that they had a gun on him. A Pueblo officer told him to drop the phone as if he'd been holding a weapon, because I think he just didn't know what to say.
I like that word, Pueblo.
I am having a hell of a time saying it.
But I like it, Pueblo. I did.
I don't know why.
Pueblo.
I tell you, it's the Boston in me. There are just some letter combinations my mouth cannot form.
Pueblo.
That's one of them. Ed did as he was told, exiting the booth and putting his hands on top of it like it was the hood of a car. So that should tell you how tall he was. Yeah. The officer frisked him. No trouble there. Ed had left his weapons in the car, and he cuffed him. And with that, on April 24th, 1973, Ed's streak was done. They put him in the back of the cruiser and brought him to the Pueblo station house, where he was greeted by the police chief. Ed, who had slept maybe 3 hours in as many days, took the opportunity to begin talking, and he never stopped. He was talking and talking. He confessed his crimes to the chief, to the officers, to the receptionist, like anyone with ears.
How many more people would have died if he hadn't turned himself in, basically?
I don't know, because
I know they would have caught him because they would have figured out who it was.
Yeah.
But in the 70s, I mean, they couldn't link information like they could. Look at Ted Bundy. He just kept moving around and just picking up murders in new locations.
Exactly. So. And I said he left his DNA everywhere, like it was going to matter at that point, which it wasn't, but it's just, in our world. But yeah, I think he could have kept, especially, I mean, he didn't think to like leave the area, but if he had just gone across the country killing people, he could have really gone far.
Yeah.
So yeah, but I think the whole point was everything was, I mean, he clearly had a lot wrong, so none of it was logical, but it was all to kill his mother. Like that was the point. While Ed talked, DA Peter Chang from Santa Cruz was on a plane to Colorado, bringing with him traumatized Detective Aluffy, who had been the first on the scene at Ed's mother's apartment. When they reached the Pueblo police station, Ed seemed relieved to see them. He wanted to go home. He waived legal counsel. No surprise, but stupid.
Yep.
And extradition, and told them that he needed to be locked up to keep from continuing to kill. So exactly to your point, he knew that he would have kept going.
Right.
The Santa Cruz folks obliged, but surprisingly used Ed's green Impala to do it. They were retracing Ed's steps, stopped in Reno to return the rental and retrieve Sally's car, which was collecting dust at the nearby gas station, and returned to California using Sally's car. So they took Ed's Impala to Reno, and then from Reno to California, they took Sally's car. She had, I don't know.
Okay. I mean,
yeah,
whatever works.
It must have been a hell of a road trip, I think. I can only imagine. D.A. Chang and Detective Aluffy must have been equal parts nervous and in awe, because I am positive that Ed did not stop talking that entire trip.
I'm just in my head, this is maybe distasteful, but I'm just picturing somebody in a car being like, 15 corpses that are dead on the floor, 15 corpses on the floor. And they're like, stop telling us about murder. And he's like, but did I tell you about the fourth one? Did I tell you about the fifth one?
Yeah, I guess at some point, no, because he was like introspective. So he would talk about why he was doing things. So he was talking about the murder and all that, so full of himself. But see, I was picturing, and I would walk 500 miles.
Do you want to hear the most annoying sound ever? Mock. Yeah.
Ing.
Yeah.
Ed seemed almost jovial, glad to be returning to Santa Cruz and not at all interested in escaping. The trio stopped at drive-ins to eat, with Ed loving all the attention, except when two young, attractive women passed close to the car. In some deeply complicated psychological reaction, Ed promptly vomited. Isn't that so funny?
Oh.
Like, weird.
That is weird.
Yep. I think he just couldn't handle living women, maybe.
The officers are probably trying to, like, let him off at these places. They're like, we're just going to go to the bathroom while you sit at this table by yourself and stop talking.
Yeah, no, literally. And then when he threw up, they actually thought he was like trying to escape. They thought it was some ploy, and he was like, nope.
He's like, no, I just throw up when I see women.
Yeah, living ones. Now, while Ed and his handlers were on their way back to California, other investigators were looking through Ed's home and vehicle. As we know, there was an abundance of everything in both locations, including a shovel, water bottles, a raincoat, and a dishpan in the trunk of the Yellow Galaxy, and hair in the trunk's latch.
Like it's a murder car.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It took 4 days for the men to arrive back in Santa Cruz, which was probably about 3.5 days too many to be in the car with Ed. They were met by more than a dozen officers to transfer Ed into a different vehicle. I'm going to kill your cat. I'm just going to say that as part of the recording, because I'm going to. Yeah. Do you remember what happened? I learned a lot from Ed Kemper. Thank you.
Oh, yeah. He was crying in the first episode, too.
Yes, he was.
He's like, are you still talking about Ed? I don't like him.
He just wants love.
He does.
Both Ed and your cat. Anyway, so they were met by more than a dozen officers to transfer Ed into a different vehicle so he could take them on a little scenic tour of the nearby mountains. In exchange for the fresh air, he'd agreed to point out where one may or may not find severed body parts. Over the course of 6 hours, they recovered Marianne Pesch's body, a pelvis bone, possibly Anita Luchesa's, a green plastic bag with an unidentified arm in it, Eikoku's rib cage and pelvic bone.
Oh my God.
And some of Cindy Shaw's personal items.
That is, I just cannot imagine being the police officers walking around picking up scattered body parts.
And he knew where they were, because remember he marked them with, dry brush or whatever.
Right.
And then when they returned to the apartment building, you remember that Cindy's skull had been, or he had buried her head, looking up at his mother's apartment. Yes. So they unearthed her rotting skull. I would say that they had enough evidence at this point to charge him with something, but just to be sure, Ed volunteered to take a lie detector test. I just wrote LOL at that point. On April 30th, 1973, Ed was charged with 8 counts of murder in the first degree for the deaths of Marianne Pesch, Anita Luchessa, Eikoku, Cindy Shaw, Alice Liu, Rosalind Thorpe, Clarnell, Kemper, and Sally Hallett. I want to say Hallie Sallet. As part of this process, Ed had to complete a booking sheet. When it came to the section for emergency contact, Ed was stumped. I don't have anybody left, he said.
He murdered everyone.
He literally murdered everyone. He then asked Detective Aluffy if he could put his information down because they bonded on the road trip. And Detective Aluffy agreed, not because they bonded, just because he said okay. Ed spent the next month in jail, but the excitement had worn off and reality sunk in. On May 28th, Ed attempted to kill himself with a sharpened pen clip. When they went in to save him, he fought so hard that they had to mace him. But he was okay. Ed had been assigned a public defender, really the public defender, attorney James Jackson, which is an awesome name.
That's a great name, so especially for a lawyer.
Yeah.
James Jackson, Esquire.
Yeah, exactly. Now, he was the chief public defender of Santa Cruz. I did not know there was such a thing, but he was. Ed was lucky to some extent for that reason. Attorney Jackson was highly skilled, but he had just come off of a terribly difficult trial and was probably exhausted from that. But Attorney Jackson did his damnedest even before the trial officially began. He began filing motions criticizing the procedures of both the Pueblo and Santa Cruz officers, including that they brought Ed back to California in first a rental car and then the car of the woman he'd murdered just a few days before. Attorney Jackson claimed that none of Ed's confessions could be considered because he hadn't had an attorney present for any of them, except that he waived that. But he tried. He tried really hard.
Which I don't even know why. Ed's like, I'd like to go to jail forever. Please and thank you.
Yeah, I think, does he have to defend him? Like, he has to do his job, right?
I mean, he could waive an attorney.
Could appeal. Oh, yeah. Okay. Because I was going to say, if he didn't, let's see if I learned at all. I listened a lot. Did I learn? If Attorney Jackson didn't do a good job and then Ed appealed whatever sentence, could they have then said he had ineffective counsel and have it overturned?
Yes.
That's right. I learned.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah. I mean, he has to try to do his job, but it's stupid.
It is stupid.
Because Ed doesn't want him to.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, Ed, I was like, send me to death row, please, right now. But
wait, what was his first name? Jackson?
James.
I'm sorry, James Jackson. I am for real.
I was like, his first name is Ed. I've only said it 5,247 times.
Okay, if I couldn't remember Ed's first name, then I think it's time for me to stop doing this podcast.
That would be something I would do, though, because I'd be like, okay, that's the date, May 28th, 1973. Wait, who's this case about?
I'm like, it was Jed Kemper, right?
Jed. Circling back to our Bachelorette discussion, Jed was literally his name. One of the contestants.
Did we have that discussion 6 weeks ago?
We did. I think they were Hannah B was one of our shout outs, and that reminded me of the Bachelorette. Okay. Anyway, moving on. Now, had any of Attorney Jackson's motions actually passed, D.A. Chang would have been SOL despite all of the physical evidence, but the judge was having none of it. Yeah. And out of options, Attorney Jackson advised Ed to submit a not guilty by reason of insanity plea. On October 23rd, 1973, Ed's trial began, which is pretty quick because he was arrested on April 24th, I think. Yeah, April 30th.
And the trial was when?
October 23rd of the same year.
Yeah, that is quick.
So Attorney Jackson's goal was to show that Ed was insane, but Ed had spent a lifetime convincing everyone of the opposite, and so he had a hard time flipping the switch. Not to mention all of that readily accessible physical evidence. Oh, and the taped confessions really didn't help.
Flipping the switch or flipping the script?
Oh. Well,
either one.
He might have had some trouble with switches. I don't know.
Either way. Switches, scripts, flip them.
Yeah.
It's hard to flip them.
Yeah. He couldn't flip. Okay. Regarding the sanity, D.A. Chang brought in Dr. Joel Fort to show that Ed had been very troubled for all of his life. Mm-hmm. On top of that, Dr. Fort testified that during the murders, Ed had known what he was doing was wrong.
Yep.
This is exactly what Attorney Jackson didn't want to hear. It broke the McNaughton. Am I saying that right? McNaughton rule, under which a defendant can only be found guilty by reason of insanity if it is crystal clear beyond any doubt that they had no idea that what they were doing was wrong. Mm-hmm. Attorney Jackson's rebuttal was to have his own psychiatrist testify to something called the product standard. This is not a test, but do you know what that means?
Nope.
Okay, well, I didn't either. It claims that an entire array of violent behaviors before, during, and after they're committed are related to a diseased mind that may have known right from wrong in retrospect, but were committed because the person couldn't help themselves. So like devil made me do it type argument.
Okay.
Pretty decent argument. Didn't really help anything. During another part of the trial, Ed was already all worked up because the prosecutor was playing the tape of Ed describing in detail how he'd killed and chopped up his mother. And apparently hearing that back just stressed him out.
Right.
But during this recording, a woman sitting in the gallery angrily gave him the cutthroat motion, like, did a finger across her neck. This freaked Ed out so much that he interrupted the proceedings and demanded that she be taken out by security.
He's so dramatic.
Very dramatic and such an enigma, but he really was so afraid of physical violence. That's why he wanted all the women dead as quickly as possible. He didn't want, I probably wrote it maybe later, but I can't remember. It's in detail in my brain either way, that he chose the long distance call to the police because he was so afraid his big, he was a big guy. If he just walked in, he was afraid that they would
tackle him.
Yeah. And that he would have to fight them. So it was like a coward's way out kind of. So he's afraid of this woman making just a, motion at him. So either way, the next drama to hit the courtroom was on October 25th when D.A. Chang convinced the judge to allow the jury to see the yellow galaxy. Indeed, they marched everybody out back, behind the courthouse, where D.A. Chang talked through all of the violence and death that occurred there. And I'm pretty sure it was still stained, in the trunk. You could see blood and the hair and all that. Next up was Ed's sister's testimony. This was his sister, Allyn, Allyn, remember? Mm-hmm. From way back when, in part one. To her credit, she tried to explain how he'd been insane all his life, but in doing so, made it glaringly clear that Ed had been a serial killer in the making.
Right.
She talked about the electric chair games, his beheading and dismembering of her dolls, and of course, him killing the family pets.
The cat, yeah.
She even said that when the news of the co-ed killer first came out, especially when they were finding body parts and severed heads, she and her mother talked about how it was possible that Ed was responsible.
Yeah.
As you can imagine, this did not help his case.
No.
A few days later, on October 28th, Ed tried to kill himself again. There was no apparent trigger for this, but Ed stole a pen from a reporter and again used the sharpened clip to slit his wrists.
Oh my gosh.
This time he had more success because the guards couldn't get into his cell as quickly to help him. And that's because he'd taken the same approach as, remember the chapstick in the door latch? So it was like when he would abduct someone, he'd slip a chapstick in the door latch so they couldn't get it open. Yep. He did something similar in his jail cell. He managed to collect pieces of wood from a pencil he'd chipped, and he shoved them into the cell door lock.
People are so
creative. Yeah. Have you seen that lady on TikTok? Everybody's so creative. She reviews people's weird ass recipes that are stupid, and she's like, everybody's so creative, and it's really funny.
I haven't, but
everyone else listening to this will know what I mean.
The ingenuity involved is oh, don't worry, it'll be on my TikTok tonight.
Oh, that's true. Yeah. Enjoy. Okay. So they did eventually get in. It just took him longer, and he was treated at a nearby hospital and returned to jail. November 1st was the day everyone, including Ed, was looking forward to. It was time for him to take the stand. Much like his sister, in his attempts to talk about how insane he was, he really just underscored why he needed to be put in jail for the rest of his life. He talked about his insatiable need to hunt, kill, mutilate, and have sex with dead women. He attempted to express remorse and empathy for the victims' families, but it just ended up coming across as contradictory.
Right.
Ed's testimony was actually unremarkable otherwise because he'd already said everything he needed to say on the recording, which was being played as D.A. Chang's final evidence. In the midst of this, on November 6th, Ed made a third attempt at killing himself by using a paperclip to undo the stitches of his last try. At this point, the jailers finally asked the judge to transfer Ed out of prison and into the nearby California medical facility at Vacaville. It turns out this is actually what Ed wanted all along, because he didn't want to be in jail. He was actually afraid of all the other prisoners.
Oh, so he wanted to be in like an asylum.
Exactly. He had been there, I think, before his trial. He had been in there for a little bit. It then would have been time for closing arguments, but they had to be delayed for 2 days because Attorney Jackson's house caught fire. It was a cabin-like rural house. That word, rural. So remote and difficult to access. So Attorney Jackson was fine, but there was extensive damage to his living room, kitchen, and bedroom since it took the firefighters so long to get there.
Was it a rural house in Pueblo?
Don't make me say it. Don't. That'd be how you'd torture me. It's just an entire podcast about rural Pueblo. I think there's some other words too. The fire was ruled accidental, allegedly due to a log rolling out of the fireplace, but many suspected it could have been from citizens angry at him for defending Ed. Nothing ever proven.
Yeah.
Anyway, with Attorney Jackson back, the trial resumed on November 8th, with the prosecution and defense giving their closing arguments. Afterwards, the jury, made up of 6 men and 6 women, deliberated for just 5 hours before they found Ed sane and guilty on all 8 counts.
That long?
Yeah, exactly. That's just because they had to go through all 8 counts, and they were filling out the paperwork. The only thing Ed was upset about, so to your point, he wanted to go, well, not to jail, but he wanted to be locked up, and he actually wanted to be put to death. But he was upset because he had been found guilty of first-degree murder for all of the deaths. But his fellow serial killer, Herbert Mullen, who I've now put on my list because I know nothing about him, but he had been killing people around the same time. And in fact, some of the bodies that had been found, they were found at the same time as Ed's. So there was he was getting credit for what Ed was doing, and it made him mad. But either way, Herbert Mullen had been caught right around the same time and jailed at the same place. And he had only been convicted of 2 first-degree murders, and the remaining 8 were second-degree. And Ed felt that Herbert was a cold-blooded killer, so he should have had all of them be first-degree. So I'm just curious what he thought of himself.
Just really picking some weird hills to die on.
Exactly. Yeah, or to kill on, as it were. For his sentencing, Ed wanted the electric chair, as we know. He repeatedly told the judge he needed to be put to death, maybe even tortured to death, but Ed was out of luck. If you happen to remember from the Velma Barfield episodes, the death sentence was abolished in 1972, the year before Ed was convicted. It was overturned in 1976, but that only applied to crimes that happened after January 1st, 1974. So he slipped through, as did Charles Manson. Fun, grim fact.
Wow.
So instead of escaping into the afterlife, Ed was sentenced to 8 concurrent life sentences. In doing so, the judge told him, "May God have mercy on your soul, but you understand I have to protect the rest of the people from people like you." Ed was sent to Folsom State Prison, though he bounced between that and Vacaville, and for some reason there's a lot of conflicting information about where he was and which place he was at for how long. I'm guessing it's because it might not have been recorded to keep it under wraps where he was, but whatever. It may, or either way, he ended up being transferred after his sentencing trial. And when he was in the kind of waiting to be transferred, he asked one of the deputies for a match to light a cigarette. And a nearby sergeant yelled, "No, he can't have any matches." And Ed commented, "It's funny. Yesterday I had matches, but when you're convicted, you immediately become combustible." And I actually thought that was kind of funny because he's right. Yesterday he could have whatever he wanted. Once Ed was locked up for good, he was still thinking of ways to get himself permanently put in the medical facility. One of his more creative ideas was offering to have a lobotomy. Now, none of the prison doctors felt that this was a good idea, but amazingly, Ed had other options. You wouldn't think he did.
Oh, no. Did he take a paperclip and shove it in his eye?
No, legitimate options.
Oh, okay.
So he often wrote correspondence to keep himself busy, and one of his recipients was a Santa Monica neurosurgeon. I, first of all, have no idea how they got connected, but this doctor was willing to perform the lobotomy for free. The only problem was paying for all the hospitalization and guards that would be necessary since Ed was, a prisoner.
Right.
Apparently, an anonymous donor caught wind of this and donated $4,600, which is like $30,000 today, to fund it. But it didn't matter. The prison denied Ed's request in 1976 and the year after as well.
That's fucking wild.
Isn't that crazy? Can you imagine? He's just like, excuse me, can I have a lobotomy? I mean, we've all felt that on a bad meeting, but, now needing other ways to occupy himself at this point, because he now has the rest of his life in jail, Ed volunteered to record audiobooks for the blind. He ended up recording an incredible 5,000 hours of tapes with books like The Rosary Murders and Flowers in the Attic. Do you know about that book?
No, but can you just go listen to an Ed Kemper book on tape?
I'm surprisingly, I didn't. He actually has a great voice. It's disturbing to say that, but you listen to some of the, it's like a deep voice.
Yeah.
But yeah, I bet you probably can. They're probably terrible quality, but I'm sure he was entertained by the content. Flowers in the Attic. I don't know the other one, The Rosary Murders. And in the book that that I got a lot of my information from, I got from 2 books, but Ed Kemper, Conversations with a Killer by Derry Matera, has a list in the appendix of all of the books that he read. It's so many. But Flowers in the Attic is a really fucked up one about like incest, and it's a fucked up book. But yeah, I'm sure he was entertained by the content. And I, of course, didn't put this in my notes, but I'll share with you because it's in my brain. Mm-hmm. People loved his audiobooks so much that there was even one couple who benefited from the books that like felt like he was a celebrity and like came to meet him and like fangirls, whatever. It feels weird to say, but like they were so excited to meet him. Yeah, they weren't boys.
Fan-manned out.
Yep. Yeah. So all in all, Ed is are you just laughing at someone fan-manning?
What is
right?
What is the phrase?
It is fanboying, fangirling. Fanboying?
I don't think I've ever heard someone say fanboy.
I am inclusive, okay?
No, I'm not saying you're not, but I don't think I've ever heard somebody say I fanboyed out.
But fangirl, definitely.
Yeah, like I'm total fangirling.
Right.
But like,
so
no, I get it.
Wouldn't there be a fanboy then?
How about fan y'alling out? They fan y'alled out.
Okay, because we love you guys and you do like to know this stuff. This is only going to be like, I don't even know, like an hour or something, but we've been recording for like 3 straight hours because we had issues with the thing we record on has an SD card and like that was corrupted like 6 different times, and then
my child was awake like 4 hours past her bedtime.
Yeah, and then it's always her fridge making noise, and then I have issues reading. So we're just a little punchy right now. I'm sorry.
We're almost there.
We're almost there, and now I'm gonna just bring us back to serious.
Let's go back.
Because all in all, Ed is responsible for the deaths of 10 people.
Awful.
His paternal grandparents, the 6 young college students, and his mother and Sally. Though the impact, of course, is on more than that. We always talk about how it's the victims' families who have to live with it, and even the people involved in the case, especially with some of these more gruesome ones.
Yeah.
I'm sure any of the officers who saw and recovered the victims' body parts needed therapy.
Yeah.
And even Ed's prosecutor, D.A. Chang, struggled with alcoholism following Ed's trial, losing his practice and his family.
Oh my gosh.
Good news on that one, though. D.A. Chang went into Alcoholics Anonymous, ultimately able to return to his practice in 1991 and becoming a board member of the National Association of Criminal Defense Attorneys. So he really turned things around. But you can't blame him for, like, can you imagine
he went
having
to the other side, though, huh?
Oh, I didn't even process that. Yeah, you would notice that. I was like, oh, yeah, he's on the board of attorneys.
Well,
you're right. Yeah.
He was prosecutor. Now he's on the board for criminal defenders.
I wonder. See, that's interesting, though, because I assumed that he had trouble following, like, reading through all the atrocious things that happened. You would think you'd want to put more people behind bars.
But because he was an alcoholic, I wonder whether maybe he was involved in some sort of criminal behavior and then realized how some criminals are just ending up on the wrong side of the law for reasons that they're not beyond their control, but you know, things that are not hard issues.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know. I didn't even know. You read so much more. I was just like, yeah, he's on a board. Good for him. I was just happy that it had a happy ending for him, at least happier.
Yeah.
Ed now is 75 and not in great health. He suffered multiple strokes in 2015 and early 2016. A recent update on the Edmund Kemper Stories blog, if you remember, that's the one that's documenting everything about everything he did in his life and the victims. It says, according to an unverified source on Reddit who works at the California Medical Facility and who has direct contact with Kemper, Kemper has been having health issues in the last year, severe enough for him to be taken out of prison on a Code 3 emergency transport to an outside hospital. It happened in July 2023 and February 2024.
I cannot believe he's still alive.
I know. And I should make sure the math works that he was born. I think he was born in 78. So I think I'm a little bit off on the math because I must have read that from maybe the book or something like that. Either way, he's in his 70s and he is still imprisoned. He has been denied parole every time he's gone for it. And he is next eligible this year, 2024. The hearing is tentatively scheduled for July 9th, which is just a few weeks from this recording. So
they might give him medical leave though. Like, I forget what that's called.
Yeah. I don't know.
That has like a specific phrase.
Who knows? Is that like, what's his name? Fritzl? Is that what happened with him?
Yeah, like they're so ill or like so. I mean, with Fritzl, he has like horrific dementia, right? But
is it cheaper for them to keep them out of the hospital? I mean, out of jail or something. I don't know. It's always about cost. Always at the end of the day. Not to be pessimistic,
right? But well, I think it's also maybe it's different in that medical facility, but these prisons are not, I mean, they don't have enough space to keep geriatric patients. Like they need to be put in like assisted living, you know?
I cannot hear the word geriatric without thinking of Step Brothers. It's like, you keep your liver spotted hands off my beautiful mother, you geriatric fuck. It's just one of the best lines to be delivered in film. Okay. Anyway, any other thoughts? Because that is the long ass story of Edmund Kemper, the third.
I just have to say, as I sat here through the 12 and a half hours of Edmund Kemper, which is really only 3 hours for you gremlins, but you did such a thorough job. It was so well organized, and your shit was poetic.
Oh, thank you. I liked to write when I was young, and little did I know that I would one day be writing about severed heads and torsos and all that. I do like to write, and that's actually what makes it really hard sometimes, because when I'm trying to write the information, I'm trying to think of the best way to say it and tell you, and not just like read it really, like a Wikipedia feel, and it's hard, but I appreciate you.
You said something about how, Ed was unable to slip into the afterlife or something. It was just so poetic.
Thank you. Yeah.
I think you did a fantastic job.
I really appreciate that. I am so sick of Ed Kemper.
I'm sure. On to the next.
And probably all of you are too.
Wait till the next episode, guys.
Oh, I'm scared.
Whoa, it's way, 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 way different from this.
I thought you were going to say worse, and I was like, ooh, what other body parts are there?
It's different.
Okay. Oh boy. Okay.
It's not a serial killer.
Oh.
And people live.
Wow. You did one case semi-recently that no one died, and I was so confused.
I know. Very...
Yeah. Because true crime, I mean, typically, colloquially, see, that's the other one.
Well, that's a hard one.
It is. Anyway, we say true crime and we mean murder, usually, but there's a lot of crime. So I'm excited.
Yeah, somebody mentioned like a fraud case to me, and I was like, it's not crime.
Yeah.
And then I was like, wait, no, it is crime. Yeah. Actually.
Yeah. Did someone die though? But did he die?
Was there blood?
Okay, we're going to wrap this up. But if you are enjoying listening to Grim, make sure you're getting the most in between episodes. You can find us on Instagram at Grim Crime Podcast and on Facebook, Grim, a True Crime Podcast. And if you are sick of multiple parts from me and you want to listen to something else, you can subscribe to our Patreon to listen to the bonus episodes that Marina's been doing. And you can do that by searching Grim, a True Crime Podcast on the Patreon app or website. Depending on the tier you choose, you'll get those shout outs we do at the beginning, access to those bonus episodes, or even access to the Discord server. You can, which sounds so formal. If you don't know what a Discord server is, that sounds really scary and formal. But it's like really just a chat. It's a group chat, and it's really fun. And everyone on there is so awesome, and I look forward to it every day.
And we love a sassy peach.
And if you want to know what that is, you got to join. You can send us an email at grimcrimepodcast@gmail.com, and that's also where you can send us case suggestions, or really anywhere on the Discord server. We have a whole thing for case suggestions. Anyway, Anywhere you want to suggest it, we have a list. I am fading fast,
carrier pigeons. Carrier pigeons. I will be on my doorstep intercepting carrier pigeons if you'd like
signals. It's fine. Wait for a clear day. Okay. Wherever you do listen, please rate us, or even better, leave a written review. Thanks for being here. Listen, learn, and stay alive until next time, because the future is grim.